Now, to the latest lawsuit over the sheriff decertification law, set to take effect at the end of this month, actually, in less than 3 weeks, April 30th, unless a court grants an injunction. And we now have a second lawsuit. Now, this is the law, remind you that Senate Bill 5974 is the law that allows the Criminal Justice Training Commission to decertify a sitting sheriff. And it also sets new requirements for sheriff candidates, saying among those, you've got to be at least 25 years old. You have to have a good standing on social media. There's a little bit of room for interpretation there. You have to have 5 years of consecutive law enforcement experience. So, as we reported earlier this week, Eastern Washington has 4 sheriffs that have filed their own lawsuit, and they're doing this with the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs, WASPIC. That lawsuit has been filed, and that's in Ponderay County. So that is, I'm gonna read here so I don't get this wrong. It's Spokane County Sheriff John, Knowles. Am I pronouncing it right? It's either Knowles or Nowles. I should have found that out. Pardon me if I forgot that or got that wrong. Ponderay County Sheriff Glenn Blanksley, Stevens County Sheriff Brad Mackey, and Ferry County Sheriff Ray Maycumber. Again, the 4 of them have filed this suit arguing the law is unconstitutional. And now we have Kitsap County Sheriff's candidate Rick Cuss, who, along with the Washington State Sheriff's Association, or WASA, have filed this lawsuit in Thurston County Superior Court. That was filed on Monday, on April the 6th, arguing that sections of the new law are unconstitutional. And they, as well as the other 4 sheriffs, are seeking an injunction, basically to tell a court, block implementation of this. We don't want this going into effect even while these court cases play out. So we'll see if, if either of those challenges are successful in getting an injunction. Now, Cuss has 24 years of decorated service in the U.S. Navy, and he's a current King County Sheriff's deputy. But this new law disqualifies him from running for sheriff. Their suit names defendants Gerald Wills, who is the interim executive director of the Washington Criminal Justice Training Commission, and Washington State Patrol Chief John Batiste. I should tell you, I reached out to both. I did receive a response via email to both, basically saying since there's litigation pending, we can't really comment at this point. But here is part of my conversation with Kitsap County Sheriff's candidate Rick Cuss. Had this conversation with him late on Wednesday.
I knew there was going to be legal challenges from everywhere across the state, and I definitely wanted to be a part of that because it's definitely a fight worth fighting. And so it's kind of difficult to get everybody kind of combined on one lawsuit. We saw earlier last week the 4 sheriffs that filed with their prosecuting attorneys. Um, and so I reached out to Joe Ard. He's known for, fighting these unconstitutional things in the state. He also lives in Kitsap. And so he was working with the Washington State Sheriff's Association to also file a lawsuit. And so I told him that I wanted to be a part of it. And so he consulted the Sheriff's Association and they all agreed. They represent 39 sheriffs. And so they agreed that they would back the lawsuit that I'm in. So myself and the Washington State Sheriff's Association are co-plaintiffs in this lawsuit. And so the big thing with this lawsuit, not only does it challenge like my qualifications and the law that prevents someone from running, it also challenges the vacancy process that's created and how the CJTC is in a role. So the lawsuit shows the defendants as Washington State, the Washington State Patrol, and the Criminal Justice Training Commission. And the state legislator in the state constitution has the authority to make qualifications. However, they do not have the authority to delegate it to the executive branch, so i.e. the CJTC or the WSP. So why some of these things the state legislator can do, what they can't do is have WSP, you do the investigation with the CJTC and determine who is qualified. That is unconstitutional, and so we are fighting that as well as removing a sheriff and creating that vacancy. So this bill is just bad all around. We could probably just fill it up with thousands of pages of a lawsuit, but kind of attacking the big thing, protecting the people that want to run for sheriff and the ones that are in sheriff, protecting the voters' rights on who they voted for.
Now, the other issue with this new law is how much power and discretion that it really gives to the Criminal Justice Training Commission. And the concern here raised by opponents, including those in these lawsuits, is that it could be potentially weaponized to remove an elected sheriff if CJTC maybe doesn't like the sheriff's politics. Um, Many suggested the bill was squarely aimed at Pierce County's Sheriff Keith Swank, who basically said, "Go ahead and try it. See what happens. Just try to remove me, the elected sheriff, from office and see how my constituents respond." So he was intentionally inflammatory in those comments to get some attention to this because, he has concerns that because he's been very active politically, speaking out against some of the bills that were directed at, forcing immigration and customs officers to, demask basically. He spoke out, in pretty stiff opposition to that. So he's worried that this bill was kind of aimed at him. And others thought, yeah, maybe it was. Um, that could be the concern here. And Cuss is very concerned that some of his social media posts that he's made in recent years could come back and burn him as well.
Upon determining who's qualified to run for sheriff or hold office, there is a social media accounts review. There is the background investigation, the poly. And so, like I mentioned before, the legislature can determine qualifications, but you can't say WSP, is this person qualified or not based on your background investigation, based on the poly, which is inadmissible to begin with. Um, but especially social media. So there's candidates that kind of just, and sheriffs that kind of stay off, and there's some that are vocal about what's going on and what's wrong. And for some group like the Criminal Justice Training Commission to be able to remove or say someone's not qualified to run for sheriff based on their content on their social media is insane. And so I consider myself probably more vocal on social media because there's a lot of things that are bad, a lot of things that are wrong, a lot of crime, and I'm very outspoken about it. And that should not be politically motivated for a group to decertify or remove someone or not let them run.
Now, in the other lawsuit from the four sheriffs filed in Pend d'Oreille County, there is already a hearing set for April the 16th. So, 1 week from today to consider the plaintiff's motion for declaratory judgment and that preliminary injunction, basically to stop the April 30th implementation of this law and allow guys like Rick Cuss to continue on with their campaign. So, that would kind of put things on hold and postpone the law from being implemented. Um, Cuss told me in his case, he's also hoping for an expedited review of their case because remember, he's running for election this year. He's already got a whole bunch of donors, volunteers, folks that have been, heavily invested in his campaign going back to last November when he made the decision to run again, well before this law was even introduced early in the legislative session. And so he says there are real harms to these people that back his campaign. So he is also hoping for that injunction to allow his campaign to continue, even as, both of these lawsuits move forward in the courts. Could be a little bit of a slower process. And remember the argument from opponents during session for this bill, both from lawmakers, including every Republican, not a single Republican backed this bill, and from those testifying against it. They said it was really the most glaring example of government overreach that we've seen in the Washington state legislature in recent years because law enforcement leaders are already held accountable. They're the only elected officials in the state who would be subjected to this kind of treatment. And remember, sheriffs are directly elected in 38 of Washington's 39 counties, directly elected by the people. So if the people decide to put a sheriff in office and that sheriff posts something that the Criminal Justice Training Commission doesn't like, they could move to decertify him. And so there's, a lot of reason for concern if we want to go down this route. Make sure this is even constitutional. Both of these lawsuits now suggest it is not.